Hofstede's model, U.S. versus Egypt. Excelling in Egypt. This presentation was created to assist us in preparing for our business trip to Egypt. I would like everyone to take notes and notate any questions that you may have so they can be addressed after this presentation. Doing business with Egyptians. In order to conduct business abroad, it is very important for us to learn about the country, its culture, and its people. There are many studies and research that have taken place to assist us in understanding other cultures better and to teach us how to interact with people of those cultures effectively. Many models have been developed consisting of the data collected from research and studies to tell us about different cultures. While analyzing the Trompenaars and Hamden-Turner model, Globe model, and Hofstede model, I realized that each model contributed to my understanding of different cultures. However, I prefer using the Hofstede's model to learn more about Egypt's culture. In this presentation, we will discuss the similarities and differences between the United States and Egypt's culture using the Hofstede's model. However, first I think it's necessary to mention some background information on Egypt. About Egypt. Egypt's pharaonic civilization dates back over 7,000 years ago. Egypt is in North Africa between the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. Countries with international borders are Palestinian territories, Israel, Libya, and Sudan. The Arab Republic of Egypt shares maritime borders with Cyprus, Greece, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. It is well known for its natural beauty and architecture, which attracts many tourists. Tourism is an important part of Egypt's economy, with visitors flocking to see ancient monuments and to enjoy the country's most beautiful beaches. Two-thirds of the historical global monuments are located there. Egypt has a population of 92.4 million inhabitants as of 2017. Their spoken language is primarily Standard Arabic. About 90% of Egyptians are Muslim, which means they are followers of the Islam religion. About 10% of Egyptians are Copts, one of the oldest branches of the Christian religion. Egypt is a democratic republic up until 2005. There was never more than one presidential candidate to vote for. Egypt's most valuable resources are oil and gas, which are exported to other countries. Other exports include metals, textiles, livestock, and chemical products. Egyptian currency is referred to as a pound. When compared to the US dollar, 1 pound equals $17.64. Football is a very popular sport and it is a very common topic of discussion amongst Egyptians. Building a relationship. The best way to expand business relations in Egypt is to already have pre-existing contacts with someone from there. This is one of the easiest ways to build other relationships because in Egypt, it's more about who you know and who they are, meaning their title, position, family background, etc., which is known as being ascribed-oriented. We are required to spend time establishing a relationship with Egyptians in order for them to want to do business with us. Discussing topics on Egyptians' traditions, history, and modern-day culture is an ideal way to start a relationship with them. They take pride in these subjects, but conversating about women, religion, and politics are off limits. Plan to be in Egypt for at least 1 month, maybe more depending on the status of the business relationship. And with Egyptians. When meeting an Egyptian, keep in mind your first impression is a lasting impression. Egyptians tend to judge others based on appearance, so it's in your best interest to be well groomed. They perceive direct eye contact as honesty, so be sure to make direct eye contact with whomever you speak to. In Egypt, being in someone's personal space is considered the norm. For us as Americans, this feels like an invasion of our space. However, to establish good relationships with Egyptians, we must overcome our own discomfort. With titles being so important, it's necessary to always address people by their title to avoid offending them. When conversating amongst each other, it is typical for Egyptians to exaggerate and speak in a poetic way. They express themselves with a lot of emotions, so don't be offended or assume they are taking things lightly. It's simply the way they communicate. Try not to be so serious or reserved. This can be interpreted as disinterest. When it comes to time, Egyptians are very flexible and they expect you to be the same way. Egyptians are more relationships are more important to them than time. So relax and strictly focus on making a good impression. When visiting an Egyptian's home, it is tradition to bring a gift, remove your shoes, and use your right hand to eat and greet. Remember to respect the fact that most Egyptians pray 5 times a day, every morning. They observe all Islamic holidays, and Fridays are considered holy days. Now that we have a little background on Egypt, let's discuss Hofstede's model and how it compares and differentiates Egypt and the U.S. Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Hofstede conducted a consulting project for IBM and later decided to reinterpret his findings in terms of how IBM employees in different countries responded to the survey questions. Based on the data Hofstede received from his research, he developed 6 cultural dimensions that can relate or distinguish countries. Those cultural dimensions are uncertainty avoidance, power distance, indulgence, masculinity, individualism, and long-term orientation. Uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance is the way people cope with the unknown of the future. Egypt scored high in this area, so they want to avoid the unknown and taking risks as much as possible. The U.S. scored low, so they are comfortable with the unknown and taking risks. Power distance. Power distance is related to inequality among individuals within a culture that is accepted. Egypt scored high in power distance, which means their organizations tend to be very hierarchical. However, the U.S. organizations aren't as hierarchical. So when making decisions, Egyptians may consult with their associates, but will never allow lower level employees to be empowered to do so. At the end of the day, the final decision is the persons that's in charge. According to Egyptians, people who are in positions of authority or of a certain status are to be respected at all times. Women are rarely in management positions in Egypt. However, in the event that you do conduct business with them, keep this relationship strictly professional. Indulgence versus restraint. Indulgence is the ability to control one's desires and actions. Egypt scored low, meaning they do very well at restraining themselves. The U.S. scored high in indulgence. Masculine versus feminine. Masculine culture is when people are motivated by their own personal success. On the contrary, a feminine culture is when people are motivated by helping others and improving the quality of life. Egypt scored low in masculinity, so it's considered a feminine country, and the U.S. scored high in masculinity. Individualistic versus collectivistic culture. Individualism is when people of a society are responsible for themselves and their family. Unlike collectivism, where groups are established and the people in those groups are taken care of and gives their loyalty in return. Egypt scored high in individualism and the U.S. scored low, which means that Egypt is a collectivistic country and the U.S. is an individualistic country. Long-term orientation is the way countries are connected to their past while facing things during the present and future. Egypt and the U.S. scored low, so they are more normative, traditional, barely saves for the future, and wants fast results. Review of Hofstede's dimensions. Based on the results, Egyptians are very hierarchical, feminine risk takers who don't mind unpredictability. They are also collectivist, long-term oriented or normative, and restrained. Americans are individualists, masculine, long-term oriented or normative, and indulgent. They share power more equally, dislike unpredictability, and taking risks. Motivation. The differences between the scores of uncertainty avoidance for Egyptians and Americans play a role in how their motivation is affected when working together as a team. Egyptians are less innovative, accepting of change, and willing to take risks. So when Americans are motivated to try or do something new, and/or involves risk, they may get some resistance from their Egyptian colleagues. Teamwork. As far as teamwork is concerned, their differences in power distance affects the way Egyptians and Americans work as a team. Egyptians have an established hierarchy in which leaders aren't directly accessible. Decision making is left up to the leader and the leader alone. Americans work together more so as a team, and leaders look to empower others when there are decisions to be made. In order for Americans to work with Egyptians, they must be willing to accept that their input may not always be solicited or communication. Communication between Egyptians and Americans could be affected when working together because Egyptians would rather have informal communication first than have formal communication. However, Americans would prefer to have formal communication initially, and if things go well, then they would possibly engage in informal communication. The problem with this is Egyptians are reluctant to speak on any business matters without establishing a personal relationship first. Although this may be difficult to do, it is necessary to conduct business with them. It's simply this way because Egyptians are collectivists who value relationships and Americans are individualists. This is the conclusion of my presentation on the comparisons and differences of Egyptians and Americans using Hofstede's cultural dimension model. I hope you have a better understanding of the Egyptian culture and are more prepared when interacting with them.